Well, hi everybody. In this video, I'm going to talk about my biggest guitar challenges, how I've overcome some of them, and how I'm still working on some of them. We all have different challenges on the instrument, and no matter who you are, it's a work in progress for us all. I've been playing about 20 years now. I'm 30 right now, and I started when I was about 10 years old. The first 10 years of my guitar playing journey was spent in Australia, which is where I grew up, and then I moved to Nashville when I was about 18, 19. So roughly speaking, the last 10 years I've been in Nashville. And so I've had different challenges throughout my journey, and I'm going to kind of break those down in terms of the first 10 years and then the second 10 years. So I hope you enjoy this video. I hope you find it interesting. I have a feeling many of you will relate to these challenges because they're common to just about every guitar player out there. And please like this video and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Hope you enjoy it. Okay, so the first 10 years. So I started playing guitar when I was about 10 years old, and I took guitar lessons for the first year or so with a really great local teacher named Jeff Wallage. I called him Wally, that's his nickname. And he showed me how to play folk songs and just really, really great songs. He showed me how to play 12-bar blues. He showed me how to play Tears in Heaven and a few Eric Clapton songs that I just loved learning. And I used to go home after our weekly lesson, and I'd practice what he showed me, and then I'd learn something else, and then I'd bring it back to him to show him. So every week he would show me something, and I'd show him something else that I learned on my own. It was kind of a fun process. And I would say my biggest challenge early on was there wasn't enough time in the day to practice. I was so into it, and I carried my guitar everywhere with me. I carried it to school, and I'd practice at recess and lunch. I remember one time I went with my mom to the doctor. I think it was just for a checkup or something, and I sat in the doctor's waiting room playing. And it was in Bellbrook, New South Wales, which is a very rural town. Bellbrook probably has a population of less than 500 people, and there's one doctor. And I sat there playing in the waiting room, and there was a great musician who happened to be sitting there named Peter Hayes. He pulled over the guitar and showed me a few licks, and I was just, so inspired and so obsessed with playing, and I just couldn't find enough time in the day to practice. So that was my first guitar challenge. Another challenge early on was, I didn't have enough money to buy all the gear I wanted. I used to have a mail order catalog by Pro Audio, which is a music store down in Australia. I think they're based in Canberra. I say Canberra like such an American. It's Canberra. But I had the mail order catalog, and I memorized that thing front to back. I knew the price of every guitar. I knew the different makes and the different models. I knew all about amps. I knew about PA systems. I knew about microphones. I knew about computer recording things. And I just used to, flip through this magazine and dream about owning all this equipment and owning all these guitars. And, I grew up on a farm, basically. We didn't have a lot of money. And I was really fortunate that my parents had quite a few musician friends, and they would loan me instruments, when I was first starting out. So I got loaned a good electric guitar because the electric guitar I had wasn't a quality instrument. I got a $60 nylon string 3/4 size guitar, which was my first instrument that I learned to play on, and I just wore the fretboard off of that thing. I absolutely played it incessantly. And it was a great guitar to learn on. But yeah, my parents' friends would lend me guitars, and then eventually I saved up and bought a little Marshall solid state combo. I think it was a 40-watt amp, and I bought a Fender Strat. Actually split it with my dad, my parents. They paid half and I paid half, and that was when I was 13 or 14 or so. And so that Strat became my kind of electric guitar, and I was playing in a lot of bands at the time. So yeah, definitely scrounging money together to buy gear was a big challenge early on. When I was first starting out, and I still have this problem, I still struggle with this, it's timing. And there's a rabbit misbehaving back there. So if I was to go back in time and listen to myself play when I was much younger, I think the thing that would stand out as being something I was struggling with was I played everything way too fast. Everything was just at breakneck speed. I didn't play any ballads. I had good timing in the sense of, I had a good musical feel. I could definitely, play syncopated type songs, but there's a difference between being able to, play syncopated type songs and then being able to play with really good time and consistent, steady time, no matter whether you're on stage or behind a microphone or anything. And for the longest time, everything was just way too fast, and I didn't have good command of my tempo. And that's something that is one of the biggest challenges for me that I'm constantly working on, is practicing with a metronome, trying to get my timing to be more consistent and my feel to be better, my groove to be better. So that's been a challenge, from day one for sure. Another challenge back then was getting gigs and finding other people to jam with. So basically just getting out of my practice room and playing on stage, playing with other people. I played in a few bands. I played in a band with some friends I went to school with. We were called the Chaotic Penguins. We were a covers band and we used to rehearse once a week. And I also played with, a variety of other people around town, just kind of being the side guitarist as a teenager. And I was just always craving more gigs, more experience, and jamming with literally anyone I could. I was just craving that. I grew up on a farm. Anyone who knows my story kind of knows, that I grew up out in the bush. Yeah, I just didn't really have access to a lot of people to jam with outside of my parents' musician friends. So they became great sources of musical information to me. I would approach them and say, how do you play over this 12-bar blues? How do you play over this chord progression? What kind of pedals are you using? What kind of amp are you using? What kind of pick do you use? What kind of picking, were you using when you played this? I was just asking a lot of questions and just trying to be out and amongst the music as much as I could. That was a big, big challenge, is being up in the bush and just not having a lot of that. So getting out there and trying to get any gig I could. I'd play the opening of a Manhole cover, I used to say. Another challenge was ignoring people who would be negative. In Australia, we have a thing called the tall poppy syndrome, which is when a poppy gets too tall, you cut it off. And so sometimes there's a bit of an underlying cultural, attitude towards anyone who's really striving and trying to do their best to kind of bring them back to reality a little bit. And, that can be a good thing in terms of don't get too big for your britches. But it also can be a negative thing if there's kind of this bitterness and jealousy and just not an encouraging spirit. And so I felt a bit of that. There were people in my family who told me, "Oh, you'll never be a guitarist. You'll never be a professional," or you should really stick to something that's more, traditional path. Thankfully, my parents, they never told me what to do. They never told me to practice. They never forced me to do anything. They were very strict in a sense that, like, we weren't allowed to watch TV during the week. We had to do our farm chores, and we had to do well at school. Yeah, it was pretty strict overall, my upbringing. But my parents didn't tell me what to do in terms of career. They could just see I was just obsessed with music. I played in a lot of pubs growing up, and there'd be a lot of drunk people, fully grown adults, who would give me the most ridiculous advice you can imagine. And I learned pretty early on to just, tune that out. Never trust a philosopher who's not an athlete. That's kind of a saying I always say to myself. And that gave me a bit of a attitude in high school in terms of there were some teachers that I really respected, and there were some teachers who I just couldn't get myself to respect. So that was a bit of an issue, but But it's a principle I do believe in. You know, you've really got to be careful who you take advice from. So when I went into the recording studio for the first time, I realized that I didn't sound the way I wanted to sound. You know, I had this vision in my head. I was a dreamer. You know, I spent all day reading music catalogs, thinking of all the gear I could buy and all the guitars I could buy, and being on stage and playing all these gigs and playing with all these different people, being able to play any style. And when I went into the studio for the first time and worked with, you know, someone who was producing and engineering, I would go in there and play, and I'd come back and listen, and I'd be like, whoa, I do not sound like I thought I sounded. And so that was a cold hard reality check. And that was a real challenge because, yeah, I'd been just obsessively playing for years. You know, I was about 15 at that point, really, and went in to record a solo guitar album, Birdseed, that album became, and I just really struggled with it. I struggled to play in time. I struggled to articulate the melody of the songs, and I wasn't happy with the tone I was getting with my hands. So that was a real challenge. And the way I addressed that challenge was, you know, I came home and I just developed a practice routine, a really disciplined practice routine where I'd wake up at 4 a.m. I had a library of VHS tapes and DVDs, and we didn't have very fast internet back then, so learning from YouTube and forums and everything was kind of, not as easy as it is now. But I had this great library of instructional VHS tapes and videos. That's why I love creating courses now, is because that's how I learned to play, really. And so I basically, really was interested in learning jazz and learning how to improvise, as well as getting my chops to be really, really clean, so that I could play any song at any speed. And so I used to wake up at 4 a.m. and work with 15-minute practice blocks. And I'd practice, right-hand exercises, left-hand exercises, learning jazz standards. I'd practice improvising, mainly learned jazz from reading books. And that was a challenge in itself because, I think it's very difficult to learn jazz without someone showing it to you, without someone sitting you down and saying, no, that's wrong. This is the right way to approach that chord progression, or this is how to play that standard. Instead, I was just watching videos with people, and I was reading books, and I was just trying to kind of piece it all together myself, and it was difficult. I think I could have had a much easier time learning jazz than I did. But it's been a constant challenge, and these days, if I really want to challenge myself, I'll pull out my Joe Pass book, and I'll work through some of his phrases, and it's just like I could spend a day on one line of his playing. It's so brilliant. So another challenge back then was making a name for myself. I was pretty determined to forge my path, to get out of this little small town I was living in. Yeah, I really wanted to make a name for myself. I played on the street corner. I sold my own CDs. And I would post videos online. There's a few videos of me playing in my bedroom on my YouTube channel from back then, playing Misty and Strutting It, I think were my first two videos. That kind of sums up, the Australia chapter of my journey. And then, moving to Nashville, I encountered a whole other host of challenges. I have all my challenges written down on a piece of paper here, my notes for this video. So the first challenge was I decided I wanted to play in a trio. And I just won Australia's Got Talent, so I had a bunch of money, and I could basically do what I wanted in terms of, I could hire a band, I could go into the best studios and record with the best players. I had money to do that. And I had, just won that TV show, so I had kind of a name and a bit of buzz going on. And fronting a band was a real challenge because, you got to deal with personalities. And you got to be a leader when you're leading a band. This wasn't like I was playing with my high school buddies. This was me, charging people money to come to a show, me getting on stage with other musicians and putting on a show that was worth going to see. I had some really amazing musicians playing with me, and I had some amazing memories playing great shows. But over 5 years of playing with the trio, I had probably 10 different versions of the band. So there was a lot of rehearsing different players. The thing about living in Nashville is there's a lot of great players. The caliber of musicianship is so high, but there's also a lot of competition. So for me to hire a bass player and drummer, I'm competing with, literally every other artist who's trying to get great players to work with. So, fortunately I had some really great people to work with, and I learned a lot doing that. Especially playing with Bernard Harris and Marcus Hill. I learned a lot from Bernard about arranging songs. He's really a good musical director. And I learned a lot from Marcus about groove and dynamics and time. But that whole experience was a challenge, I think, just emotional maturity-wise, because, I was leading the show, and I kind of just dived into that, and it was a challenge. Another challenge was writing songs. When I first came to Nashville, I started writing with a lot of different people, and I struggled writing lyrics. I struggled, to tell you the truth, when I was in Australia, I wrote a lot of songs, and I wrote a lot of instrumental songs that I still play to this day. I was kind of fearless. And then when I came to Nashville, people had a different idea of what a song should be. So it was a challenge in a sense that, people were really going for a pretty commercial type song. And that wasn't necessarily what I was interested in, but at the same time, I was interested in having popularity. So navigating all that was a real challenge. Getting distracted by the music business, I'd say, was a real challenge. And I don't mean that in terms of, I had bad people involved or anything like that. It was just kind of like, sometimes I feel like I lost sight of the music itself, my playing, what I wanted to accomplish, the story I wanted to tell with my music, and I got distracted by the business side of things, which honestly, for my first years living in Nashville, I just burned through money, and it was really, really challenging to find stability and feel like I could relax and just play music. So that was a real challenge for me. Another challenge with my playing was my health. I developed psoriasis all over my body, all over the trunk of my body, all over my chest and my stomach and my hands and my feet. And it was a kind of recurring thing throughout my adolescent years, I would say late teens to my mid-20s. That would affect my playing in a number of ways. I'd be on tour. I remember I was on tour in England one time, and I developed iritis in my right eye. And it's very connected to psoriasis. It's an autoimmune condition, and it's very painful. You have to take steroid drops, and you basically can't look at light without experiencing pain for weeks. So on the road, that was a real challenge. I remember I got my wisdom teeth out one time and then played a show in England 5 days later. So I was on a plane with my mouth stopped up with cotton going to England from Nashville. That was not a pleasant experience. But just learning how to eat in America was a challenge. I grew up in the bush. We were literally slaughtering meat and eating vegetables from the garden. It was a very kind of clean way of eating. And then when I came to the US, being on the road, there's just fast food everywhere. And so I feel like it took me a while to figure out how to eat in a way that worked for my health. And I'm happy to say that these days I feel great. I have had no psoriasis or autoimmune issues in the last 3-4 years. Occasionally I would get a flare-up, and I just learnt to basically stop eating sugar and a lot of processed foods that would create inflammation. So that was a challenge for me. Learning how to record in the studio, learning how to play sessions, as well as engineer myself, that was a challenge. I remember, when I first came to Nashville, I would just watch engineers operating Pro Tools, and I just had no idea how it worked. I had to learn what playlisting was, what punching in was, how not to slap the backbeat on the guitar. You know how you do a backbeat slap when you're playing a solo fingerstyle piece. I had to learn how to not do that when I'm playing with a drummer, because the backbeats will flam against, his backbeats or her backbeats. And just learning how to record, learning where to place the microphone, which guitars to bring to a session, how to read a Nashville number chart, just always be on time, always do a great job. I feel like I had a pretty good schooling in how to do that being a band leader, because I learned that if someone didn't turn up on time, it really made things difficult. And if someone was on stage with you and weren't giving 110%, it was so much harder to put on a great show. So I always showed up to sessions really trying to bring 180%. And learning how to engineer became a necessity, because I was spending so much money in studios, paying people really good money to allow me to record endless takes of a guitar solo unnecessarily. And so I was such a perfectionist, and I still am. I still have that side of me, and that becomes very expensive if you're paying engineer and studio time. So I feel like I learned to record and engineer by necessity, and that has been a real journey. I'm still researching mics and preamps and converters, and I'm still obsessed with recording gear and the recording process, and I love making music and recording music. It's a never-ending journey for sure, but that has been a challenge, learning how to do that. And that journey honestly started when I was about 12, and I was working on an old PC with Cubase, a hacked version of Cubase, a cracked version of Cubase, I should say, from LimeWire. And I used to just layer my guitar parts, and nothing was in time because of the latency of my cheap M-Audio sound card. But it's been quite a journey figuring out how to record and learning how to play in the studio. Learning how to improvise has been an interesting journey, because one of my favorite things to do in my first band when I was 12 or 13 was to basically play long guitar solos. I was kind of really into being in a jam band, basically. And I used to love playing Santana songs, anything, with a little bit of a psychedelic bent that would allow me to play a long guitar solo. Then I got really into playing fingerstyle guitar, and that was mostly, pretty well arranged pieces by Tommy and Chet Atkins and Jerry Reed, my own compositions. And, I would improvise here and there when I was playing fingerstyle, but it wasn't like that was, I would play a 90-minute show and there'd be maybe, 5% of that would be improvised, but everything else was arranged. As I was fronting a band in Nashville and playing sessions, I kind of felt like I really needed to learn how to dial in my improvising and learn how to just improve my phrasing and how to not repeat myself, how to sound musical, how to not sound super, too technical, and basically how to not overthink it. So that has been a journey that I really don't have a way of saying this is how it's done. It's really kind of a honed skill that comes from knowing the scales, knowing the fingerboard, and having experience playing in bands. That's the way it happened for me. Yeah, and overthinking it in general has been definitely one of my biggest challenges with my playing. Overthinking it in terms of being just OCD, doing 40 takes of a guitar solo, or feeling like, just being too hard on myself, sometimes being not hard enough on myself, like, before I went into the studio for the first time. But, overthinking it and getting too inside your head is something that I tend to do if I spend too much time practicing and I don't get out and play on stage or jam with someone or record something or make a video or just have some kind of functional purpose for my practicing. That's been a challenge. It's been a challenge kind of turning from being a touring guitarist, touring music artist, playing 150 to 200 shows a year, as I have done for years now, to being an online guitarist over the past year during the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. So it's been wonderful in many ways to realize that I don't need to be gone all the time in order to connect with people and share music. I feel like I've really grown my audience a lot in the past year through posting a lot of videos online. When I'm spending less time driving around and flying around, I have more time to arrange songs, more time to write songs, more time to practice. So that has resulted in me having, more music to share. So that's been a really wonderful thing, but that has definitely been an adjustment and a challenge. I've had to learn how to produce video content and get that workflow really down. So that's been a fun process. I've enjoyed the technical side of that, learning how to edit in a basic way and record videos pretty efficiently and effectively. I feel like developing my own signature tone and style and sound is a constant challenge. And it's something that I'm thinking more about lately. As I said, I've been playing for 20 years. The first 10 years were in Australia. The second 10 years, roughly speaking, were in Nashville. There's a quote by Carl Jung that really sums up where I feel like I'm at with, looking at the next 10 years. And the vision is, I wrote it down here, I didn't want to mess it up. Your vision will become clear only when you look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes. I feel like it's really important to dream as a musician. I mean, we need to be inspired to play. We need to have a dream and have a vision. That's a really important ingredient. But I feel like the next step for me is to really look inside and not outside. And that's going to be a really wonderful journey, I feel. I feel like I've been doing that lately intuitively. If I'm honest with myself, I feel like that is the real challenge going forward is really digging deep inside and finding the truest music in there that I can. So that's a lot of challenges. Another big challenge that I think has been a huge one all the way through my journey. And it's a challenge for everyone in this age, and that is the challenge of distraction. There's so many things we could be doing. There's so many distractions online. It's hard to carve enough time to practice and not be interrupted by things. But I definitely feel that my best work has been done when I have had limited distractions. And that's been a conscious effort on my part in terms of, waking up early to practice. That's really why I do that, is because I'm less distracted in the early hours. That's just what works for me. So I think everybody out there will relate to that distraction. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you've made it to the end, please comment, "It's a process." It's a process, because I really believe, playing music itself is a gift, and developing our skills as musicians is a craft, and it's a process, and it's a wonderful journey. I love playing music more now than I ever have. It's really inspiring to see my heroes still inspired, still creating great music, and it's a wonderful, wonderful journey I'm grateful to be on. So thanks very much for watching this video. Please subscribe here to my channel if you haven't already. And take it easy. All the best with your playing.